Good morning. My name is Jen Kanzi Eaton. I will be your worship associate for today. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Come walk with us this hour. Life Again by John Bannister Tabb. Out of the dusk, a shadow, then a spark. Out of the cloud, silence, then a lark. Out of the heart, a rapture, then a pain. Out of the dead, cold ashes, life again. And now we will have our hymn number 6, As Long as I Have Breath. Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Long and vain may be my way, still breath of thy breath each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I And now for our chalice lighting. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to speak the truth in love, and to help one another. Reading from Mark 16. On the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, saying, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb?" They looked up and saw the stone had already been rolled back. And on the right, they saw a young man. They were alarmed. But the man said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing, for they were afraid. Passover by Lynn Unger. They thought they were safe that spring night when they dabbed the doorways with sacrificial blood. To be sure, the angel of death passed over them. But for what? 40 years in the desert without a home or bed, following new laws to an unknown land. Easier to have died in Egypt or stayed there a slave, pretending that safety is in the old and familiar. But the promise from those first naked days outside the garden is that there is no safety. Only a terrible blessing of the journey. You were born through a doorway marked in blood. We are, all of us, passed over, brushed in the night by terrible wings. Ask that fierce presence whose imagination you hold. God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might at last glimpse the stars, brilliant in the desert sky.
Joyful is the dawn, holy hidden God, holy paradise beyond all memory, majesty and darkness, energy of love, word and flesh, the mystery proclaiming. Joyful is the dark, spirit of the deep, waking on the world creation, silken sheen of midnight, plumage black and bright, swooping with the beauty of a raven. Joyful is the dark, coolness of the tomb, waiting for the wonder of the morning. Never was that midnight touched by dread and gloom. Darkness was the cradle of the dawning. Joyful is the dawn, depth of love divine. Glory, looming thunder, cloud of glory, holy haunting
Easter comes too quickly after Good Friday. Those were the words of Rosemary Kenichi, a Catholic nun who taught at the Star King School for the Ministry, the seminary I attended in Berkeley, California. Her specialty areas were pastoral counseling and professional ethics, but she was always eager to engage with us in theological debates. So one day when she was questioning us about the meaning of Holy Week and Easter for Unitarian Universalists, she said, "You know, Easter comes too quickly after Good Friday." At the time, that was a bit startling for me to hear, as it might be for you. So let's think about that, and we'll come back to it after we reflect on the stories of Holy Week and Passover. Jesus had spent 3 years teaching and healing throughout Galilee, and many people had been deeply touched by his words and deeds. He and his friends made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, one of the great Jewish holy days. Many biblical scholars think that this was his first trip to the Jewish holy city. When they got there, they staged a joyful little parade with palms and hosannas. The mood quickly changes. Sometime early in the week, Jesus goes to the temple to make an offering. He is deeply offended by the merchants and money changers that clog the temple courtyard. He is so angry that he creates some kind of disturbance, probably what today might be called a riot, in fact. The authorities are now looking for him. The temple priests and the Roman procurator don't tolerate any disturbances, especially during religious festivals, when the city is full of people. The energy level is high, as well as tensions. And Roman justice, if you want to call it that, is swift and fierce. On Thursday, Jesus and his followers find a quiet place to have their Passover Seder meal. And in the dark of night, Jesus goes out of the city to pray. There he is arrested, and the following day crucified, like a common criminal. Triumph and tragedy, all in a few short days. What must that have been like for Jesus' friends and followers? Here was the one they thought would be the Messiah, the great Hebrew prophet of all time, the one whose teachings would revitalize the Hebrew faith, the one who had led them to a more intimate understanding of their God, of themselves, and of their world. The one who in parable and story and healing of body and soul had found a way to transcend Roman oppression. And he was now gone, brutally tortured and crucified during the holiest of their religious festivals. Can you imagine the grief, the anger, the fear, the absolute despair that came over them? Their lives were completely upended. Where could they turn? What could they do now? Passover, the feast that commemorates liberation of the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt, began on Wednesday evening this past week. The Hebrew slaves were asked to leave everything they knew behind and follow this guy, Moses, out into the night to escape. Not only were they escaping from bondage that night, but they were escaping from death itself. The story tells us that the angel of death, probably some kind of plague or disease, came through Egypt that night to claim the firstborn in every family. The only way for the Hebrews to be spared was to put lamb's blood around their doorposts. The lamb's blood would signal the angel of death to pass over the homes of the Hebrew people. hence the name Passover. After leaving Egypt and crossing the Sea of Reeds, the biblical narrative tells us that they wandered in the desert for 40 years before coming to a new home. Some complained and wanted to return to Egypt and to slavery. The loss of what was familiar and known was too great. For some, the changes they had to make to get to the other side of this, to get to freedom, it was costing too much. For them and for us, it takes a long time to travel to the land of promise, to the ideal place that we'd like to be. It takes a long time to come back to life after a tragic incident. And Easter does come too soon after Good Friday. With COVID-19, we are now living in the midst of a Good Friday moment, and a Passover one as well. Our lives have been upended, and there is fear and death all around us. There is no Easter in 3 days. We can't even see the light at the end of this tunnel and have no idea what life will be like after this is over. We know we have faith that life will go on. We know we have faith that life will go on, that our Easter, that our promised land will come. But right now we are locked in our own houses, our own tombs, if you will, and our own personal desert journeys for a while. It's the same with other crises and experiences of tragedy, pain, and loss. Eventually we heal and return to life, but our lives are transformed by whatever has happened to us, and it takes way longer than 3 days. There is no quick fix to the difficult and tragic issues we encounter. What do we do when we experience such a change in our lives? How do we make sense of things after pain and tragedy? How do we move on? I would suggest that we have 3 choices. We can pretend that nothing has happened and stifle and ignore our pain, or in this case, the warnings about self-care and social distancing. But we can only suppress things for so long before they will explode in some physical or emotional crisis. Or we will have to find a way to keep pretending, to keep our feelings at bay, perhaps through substance abuse or addiction, perhaps by filling our lives with so much that we numb ourselves to thoughts and feelings. Another way is that we can try to live in the past, try to recapture the glory and elation of those Palm Sunday moments. I suppose we can somehow think that everything will be the way it was and thereby minimize the risk or the pain we are in. But this only destroys our ability to deal with today, and it deadens us inside to the wonderful things that could come tomorrow. There will be other Palm Sunday moments. There will be other hosannas, but they will be very different from what was before. The third choice is when we face our pain, our grief, our anger, and today especially our fear, knowing that most, if not all of us, will survive this tragedy. We then allow ourselves to be transformed in some way through our experience of isolation and fear, of hurt and loss. We come through changed, different somehow from who we were before. This may seem like the most difficult option in the moment, but it is the one that will bring us true healing and wholeness. This is when we experience what it can mean to return to life after we have been deadened. This is ultimately the Easter, the resurrection to which we are called. After Good Friday moments, we can't go back to Thursday or to a few months ago when everything was grand. We have to find a new beginning. But this is no easy task, and it can't be quickly hurried through our busy lives. If we expect Easter moments to rise out of the tombs of our grief in the equivalent of 3 days, we will be sorely disappointed and may fall into the trap of hurting ourselves and others. Not only was Rosemary right that Easter does come too quickly after Good Friday, but resurrection is a process, not an event. Resurrection happens continuously over time. The more we are open to it, the more we work at it, the more we allow the spirit of our own grief and fear and joy to transform our lives. One of the readings this morning was from the Gospel of Mark, which ends with the words, "They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." Scholars tell us that this was the original ending of that gospel. Mark was the first gospel to appear in written form, so at least for some, the meaning of Jesus' body not being in the tomb might still have been unclear. Easter, as we know it, took a couple of generations, actually a couple of centuries, for the meaning that we have today. Over the years, there were several verses added to that story to make it fit with what the early Christian church understood to be the meaning of Easter. But as it is today, confusion, fear, and silence are the stuff of life. And sometimes that is the way we live, and that is the way the story ends. Now, there are other confusing parts of the story. Even for Jesus' disciples, whatever Easter was, it wasn't this big magical transforming experience that we might imagine. They were still lost and confused, terrified, angry. They didn't know where to turn. One of the Gospels says that they returned to Galilee, but I don't think that's accurate. What we do seem to know is that 7 weeks after Easter, they were still filled with fear and confusion. They were still locked into the same room they had rented for their stay in Jerusalem, the same room they had used for the Passover celebration the night before Jesus was executed. 7 weeks after Easter, on a Sunday that we call Pentecost, they finally had the courage and the vision to go out into the world and to proclaim the Jesus message of love and forgiveness. They were filled with the Spirit, with a spiritual power and clarity that gave them a direction forward. It took them 7 weeks. Now, this year, Pentecost falls on May 31st. Perhaps in our own continued exile from life as we knew it, we may also by then be able to learn more about what our future will hold. Our own resurrection is birthed out of the depths of lifelessness and despair, just as the cold, dead earth awakens in the spring. Our own resurrection dawns not in the morning, but over time as we heal our wounded hearts and liberate ourselves from our fear and all that holds us in bondage, and transforms our pain into a newer version of the ways we will need to live. In the poem Passover that was one of our readings, my colleague, the Reverend Lynn Unger, writes, "God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might at last glimpse the stars brilliant in the desert sky. God or human life never promised us safety and security. We are never guaranteed that all will go according to our plan, or that there will not be times of crisis and struggle, of pain and death. God and life do promise us occasions for grace, for the presence of the holy among us. In the brilliance of an Easter morn, we know we can one day leave all that enslaves us in that stone-cold tomb and rise to a new life transformed by the hope that we can once again reach for those stars. Happy Passover. Happy Easter.
Oh, the days of days is here. Hallelujah. Festival of love and cheer. Hallelujah. Let the sovereign stream abroad. Hallelujah. Nature wakes from sleeping death. Hallelujah. Fields are smiling in the sun. Hallelujah. Rose and streamlets seaward run. Hallelujah. Tender blade and leaf appear. Hallelujah. 'Tis the springtide of the year. Hallelujah. Oh, the Eastertide is here. Hallelujah. Music fills the atmosphere. Hallelujah. Join you, people, and sing. Hallelujah. Love and praise and thanksgiving. Hallelujah.
The Reverend Jane Jepka writes, "We will find our hearts again and our good spirits. We will love and believe and give and wonder and feel again the eternal powers. The flow of life moves ever onward through one faithful spring and another and now another. And it is our job, our calling, to say yes to life, yes to truth, and yes to love. Amen. Blessed be."